So people really don't like Goblin Slayer, and besides their reactions to it being pretty hilarious, I think they've given me a great opportunity to address a few very stupid mindsets I've seen floating around for a while. I think it's important first to see where people's complaints are, so for anyone unaware, Goblin Slayer is a dark fantasy seinen series, and it doesn't waste much time in making that known. Early on there is a rape scene in the first episode, and this is where the controversy begins. I like to tackle this one issue at a time, so let's start with the biggest one. People just seem to think this topic should not be covered at all, or that it was handled in a sexualized way. First of all, I have a firm belief that no topic should be off the table in fiction. To say it should is no different than censorship. These things do exist and can be used to craft a story, invoke feelings, and well, anything else a certain topic can bring with it. I would say it's more insulting to not want to talk about these things in any capacity. If we take Goblin Slayer's rape scene, it's very clear what's going on here. They want you to see how vile and disgusting these creatures are. This scene is portrayed with screaming, blood, crying. There's nothing that inherently feels sexy about it. To the people saying that this is somehow sexual, I think that says more about you, if you can look at a girl being violated in such a way and think, wow, this is sexy. And I'm not even saying you're horrible if you got something from it. Everyone's got their kinks, man, but that's on you, not the show. To use an act within a narrative does not mean it's in support of it. To make it clear, it's perfectly fine if you're uncomfortable during this scene. I was very uncomfortable, but I understand that was purposeful, and I can handle it. You don't have to like this scene, you don't have to like this show, and you don't have to like anything, but that doesn't make something bad inherently. There are plenty of pieces of media I skip on just because their themes or concepts don't interest me. Now I'd like to take a look at another example of a similar case. To this in A Clockwork Orange, there is a rape scene, a few in fact, in this movie as well. In an interview with Jan Harlan, the director's brother-in-law, he was speaking of how people would criticize Kubrick, the director, for making those scenes unbearable to watch. He spoke of how Kubrick would say, if we have to show a rape, it has to be atrocious. If the spectators find it despicable, it's normal because it is. It has to be. Could you imagine if it was pleasant to watch? Let's think about that. If these scenes were portrayed even somewhat pleasantly, wouldn't that be vastly grosser? Instead of portraying them as this horrific act, as they are. They aren't being romanticized, they aren't in support. They're to say something about either the world or a particular character, something horrible. For example, a not-so-deep realization you could have while watching Goblin Slayer is that this specific scenario is in a lot of media. Girls being kidnapped by creatures is pretty prevalent in this setting. But typically not much happens, they get tied up and that's about it. But come on, you know the reason it's usually women, right? We don't talk about it or show it because it's not necessary, or the story doesn't want to get too dark, understandably. But Goblin Slayer does and uses it as such. I'm not saying it's a great deep dive into the topic, but fuck man, even after the event, we both see and hear about how all of these women and adventurers are messed up forever. And it's pretty heavy to take in that this is their reality. Like, people complain that the show did this to random nobodies, so it just wanted to be edgy and shock you, but I really don't understand how your job can be critiquing media such as this, and not clearly see that that's the point, the fact that they're nobody. They don't want you to think these people are special or particularly different. This is something normal for the world, and only adventurers come to truly understand it. That's the true horror in it. This whole episode and many other parts of the series are set up to make you hate these creatures. You're supposed to be rooting for Goblin Slayer. They want you to understand his worldview, even if you don't end up fully agreeing with it.
Ew, I like them! I like goblins! Ah!
A not so well thought out criticism I heard about this concept is that the show is being too edgy by being black and white about this. Maybe it should have a gray area. Some goblins should be good, maybe you shouldn't have killed the goblin kids or something. But this goes back to the topic of not everything is for you. There are plenty, especially nowadays, stories that give you a great conflict. That has appeal and frequently gets praise, but that doesn't mean that's the only way to tell a story. It's called fucking Goblin Slayer, guys. It isn't trying to be deep or anything. Later on in the manga, it even shows a chapter from the goblin's perspective. Not to show us that one might be redeemable, but as further proof of how the entire species is exactly the opposite. These creatures are just supposed to be pure evil, vile, nasty, and very dangerous. In fact, if you're one of the people trying to say that goblins are an allegory for Jewish people or immigrants, then again, that says something more about you. That's not the message of the show. You could argue that maybe a racist could watch it and say that goblins are totally like X minority, but that is completely irrelevant. They could just as well play Super Mario and feel like stomping on Goombas represents a pro-genocide message. One person possibly being able to interpret something negative into a piece of media doesn't suddenly mean that's what said media is all about. Specifically, people have been pointing out that goblins resemble Jewish stereotypes, and that Goblin Slayer's goal to exterminate all goblins somehow translates to a pro-Holocaust message. But at that point, you're just saying that any story with big-nosed goblins is inherently anti-Semitic. Goblin Slayer does nothing to connect Jews and goblins. That's a self-made connection, if anything. If I had to compare Goblin Slayer to something structure-wise, I'd say it's like a Grindhouse movie. We know who the good and bad guys are. The work shows us who to root for, and we take pleasure in all the crazy violence that takes place because we really hate the bad guys. There's nothing wrong with a black and white story. Which leads me to my last main point. I've said a few times people complain the show is edgy, and I don't dispute this. What I do dispute is that makes it inherently bad. I get the idea that some things go so hard in trying to be edgy on purpose that it comes off as cringy, but just because something's dark doesn't mean it's automatically at that level, or even if that's bad at all. I mean, if Berserk came out in this day and age, would it be criticized in the exact same way for some of its themes? Probably, but it's not, due to being an older property and considered a classic in some manner of speaking. Another example of a property that I find vastly enjoyable, Doom, is very edgy as well as fun. In fact, it might be the perfect comparison, seeing as both protagonists are presented in this badass way as they walk on screen with rock music blaring, slaughtering their creature of choice.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. Intel has told us there are at least 7.
Okay, I already see one. Give me. Okay.
They're the same picture.
I think one of the main reasons people don't take issue with Doom and other violent works to the same degree is because its edginess is simply violence. I feel because graphic violence is so prevalent in our culture that a lot of people are desensitized to it, but super gruesome deaths are still just as edgy when you get down to it. Goblin Slayer has these gruesome scenes far more than the one rape scene, but everyone seems to focus on just that when calling it edgy. Both of these properties are trying to be edgy and having fun with it at appropriate times. I mean, Goblin Slayer itself is something that ends up being much more lighthearted, page to page, only dipping into the more graphic nature when necessary, and maybe you folks would know that if you did any research or didn't judge your entire opinion off of the first episode. Now, before we're done here, I like to reiterate that Goblin Slayer simply isn't for everyone. I'm not making this to tell you it's some kind of highbrow masterpiece or classic like Berserk. I think it does what it sets out to do pretty effectively. All I want out of a show like this is to have fun watching shit get fucked up. If that doesn't seem appealing to you, or if you're uncomfortable with any of the things it portrays, that's totally okay. It's not my place or in my interest to change your mind. But, you know what's not your place? Playing moral police for everyone. Trying to take away something from others that they enjoy simply because you don't like it. No topic should be off limits for fiction. At the end of the day though, some people might feel that Goblin Slayer is just the McDonald's of anime. That it's cheap, instant satisfaction, and maybe that's kinda true, but goddamn, sometimes you're just in the mood for some McDonald's.